Devon Ashford was 38 years old, and until that Tuesday evening, he believed his marriage was solid. He was a civil engineer, methodical, loyal, the kind of man who read every contract twice and never once raised his voice. His wife Camille was a real estate agent, charming, ambitious, and, Devon had always assumed, completely devoted. He had no reason to think otherwise, until the phone call he made on his drive home that changed everything. Camille answered warmly. They exchanged the small talk of a married couple on autopilot. She said she loved him. He said it back. The call should have ended there, but it didn't. Devon heard breathing, then movement, then Camille's voice, completely unguarded, speaking to someone in the same room. He believed every lie, all of it. Baby, he doesn't have a single clue. A man's low laugh followed. 47 seconds, then silence. Devon sat at that red light, hands on the wheel, engine running. And what Camille didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the man she'd just underestimated was already thinking. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The autumn sun was setting early, painting the sky in muted oranges as Devon Ashford guided his Ford F-150 through familiar streets. The truck's engine hummed steadily, a sound as reliable as the man behind the wheel. A half-empty cup of coffee sat forgotten in the cup holder, gone cold hours ago during the site inspection that had run longer than expected. In the passenger footwell, blueprints were neatly rolled and secured with rubber bands, the latest revisions for the Thompson Bridge project. The hard hat that had protected him through countless site walks rested on the back seat, its white surface marked with the subtle scratches and scuffs of daily use. Each mark told a story of careful inspections and thorough oversight. Devon adjusted the air conditioning, his movements precise and measured like everything else he did. The dashboard clock read 6:17 p.m., later than usual, but not so late that Camille would worry. She understood the demands of his work, just as he understood hers. His mind drifted to the morning's team meeting, where they'd discussed load-bearing calculations for the bridge's central span. Devon had caught an inconsistency in the numbers, a small detail others might have missed, but the kind that could cause problems down the line. He'd stayed late to resolve it, working through lunch because that's who he was. Thorough. Dependable. The kind of engineer who double-checked everything. The truck's interior smelled faintly of coffee and fresh blueprints, mixed with the leather cleaner he used every other Sunday to maintain the seats. Everything in its place, everything on schedule. Devon liked order. It wasn't just about control, it was about responsibility. When people trusted you with their safety, with structures that had to stand for decades, attention to detail wasn't just a preference, it was an obligation. He thought about the large commission Camille had celebrated 14 months ago. She'd been ecstatic, talking about a complex commercial deal, but the details had remained vague. Devon hadn't pressed. Trust was like that. You either had it or you didn't, and he'd always believed in giving it completely. Grant Whitfield's name floated through his mind. The man had appeared at 2 of Camille's office events, always well-dressed, always with that easy charm that seemed to open doors. Devon remembered shaking his hand, noting the firm grip and the way Grant had clapped him on the shoulder like they were old friends, though they'd only met twice. The early days of their marriage surfaced in his memory. Camille's insistence on maintaining separate personal accounts alongside their joint one. She'd called it modern and practical, and Devon had agreed, because why wouldn't he? 5 years of marriage had taught him that sometimes love meant letting small things go. Devon switched lanes, muscle memory guiding him through the familiar route home. The traffic light ahead turned yellow, and he eased to a stop, watching an elderly couple cross the street with unhurried steps. He reached for his phone, mounted on the dashboard, and pressed the familiar contact. The Bluetooth system rang twice before Camille's voice filled the truck's cabin. "Hey, honey." "Hey," Devon replied, his voice warm and steady. "Just leaving the site. Thompson Bridge ran long. Had to sort out some calculations. Everything okay?" The background noise suggested she was moving around their kitchen. "Yeah, just details. Should be home in about 20 minutes. You need anything?" "No, I'm good. Just finishing up some paperwork." There was a rustling sound, then the soft clink of what was probably her coffee mug being set down. "Did you eat?" "Had a granola bar around 4. I'm pretty hungry now. I'll heat up the leftover lasagna from Sunday. It'll be ready when you get here." Devon smiled, genuine appreciation warming his chest. "Sounds perfect. Thanks. Of course." Her voice softened. "Love you." "Love you too," Devon responded, the words comfortable and familiar on his tongue. "See you soon." "Drive safe," he said automatically, though he was the one driving. The call should have ended there. It was their normal rhythm, brief, warm, efficient. But instead of the familiar click of disconnection, there was only silence, then breathing, movement, and then Camille's voice, suddenly closer and completely different in tone. He believed every lie, all of it. "Baby, he doesn't have a single clue." The words hung in the truck's cabin like poison gas. Devon's hand stayed frozen on the wheel, his breath caught in his throat. Through the still open line, he could hear movement, soft, intimate sounds of people who thought they were alone. A man's voice responded, low and rich with amusement. "He never will." Laughter followed. Camille's laugh, but not the one Devon knew. This was different, stripped of the warmth she used with him, raw with a cruel kind of joy he'd never heard before. There were more sounds, rustling fabric, murmured words too distant to make out, the distinct sound of a door closing. 47 seconds passed from the moment Camille thought she'd hung up until the line finally went dead. The traffic light turned green. Devon pressed the accelerator with mechanical precision, his movements automatic while his mind processed what he'd just heard. The familiar streets passed by in a blur, but he drove with the same careful attention he always did. Engineering discipline, he thought distantly. Systems don't fail just because you're in shock. He pulled into their driveway, the concrete pad he'd had repoured last spring because Camille mentioned wanting it wider. The porch light was on, warm and welcoming. Through the kitchen window he could see her moving around, probably warming up that lasagna she'd promised. His wife, the woman who had just revealed herself as a stranger. Devon sat in the truck for 11 minutes. He watched the digital clock tick through each one, using the time to regulate his breathing, to school his features into their usual pleasant neutrality. He thought about the mathematical concept of structural integrity, how a single hidden flaw could compromise an entire system. 5 years of marriage, he realized, had just failed a stress test he never knew was coming. When he finally walked through the door, his face was composed, his movements natural. Camille turned from the microwave, and Devon saw her performance with new eyes, the way she tilted her head just so, how her smile reached the precise depth it always did, the practiced warmth in her voice as she asked about his day. He answered her questions about the Thompson Bridge project, watching how skillfully she pretended to care about load-bearing calculations and municipal permits. Had she always been this good at it? Had he just never noticed the artifice because he'd never thought to look for it? They ate dinner across from each other at their kitchen island, the one she'd insisted on during the remodel, the one he'd paid for without question, because she said it would add value to the house. Devon cut his lasagna into careful bites and studied his wife like a blueprint being reviewed for flaws. Every gesture, every word became evidence. The way she touched his arm while asking about weekend plans, how she mentioned a client meeting tomorrow. Was that with Grant? Had it always been Grant? The familiar way she leaned against the counter while loading the dishwasher, performing domestic contentment with award-worthy precision. Later, in bed, Camille fell asleep quickly, the easy rest of someone who believed their secrets were safe. Devon lay awake, his mind working with the methodical focus he brought to engineering problems. He reconstructed 5 years of marriage, examining each memory for the hidden stress points he'd missed. The separate accounts she'd insisted on maintaining, the real estate deal 14 months ago that had brought in an unusually large commission, the way she'd deflected his questions about the specifics, distracting him with dinner plans and weekend getaways. Grant Whitfield's recurring appearances at office events, always casual, always just friendly enough to avoid suspicion. The picture assembled itself with devastating clarity. Devon had trusted completely, and that trust had been weaponized against him. Every "I love you," every shared meal, every morning kiss had been calculated. He was living in a structure designed to fail, and he'd never checked the foundation. When morning came, Devon had made his decision. He would not confront. Not yet. An engineer never acts without complete data, and he didn't know the full shape of what he was dealing with. You don't engage an enemy whose position you haven't fully mapped. You don't start a war until you understand the battlefield. He showered, dressed, and walked into their kitchen with the same routine he'd maintained for 5 years. Camille was at the coffee maker, pouring his travel mug the way she did every morning. He kissed her cheek, accepted the mug, told her to have a good day. She smiled. That perfect, practiced smile. Devon walked to his truck and did not look back. Devon's office door clicked shut behind him with quiet finality. Morning sun slanted through the blinds, casting striped shadows across his desk, where a fresh yellow legal pad waited. He uncapped his pen and wrote a single line at the top. What exactly did I sign? The question stared back at him, demanding answers. Devon pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Audra Mills. She picked up on the third ring. "Devon? Everything okay? I need to ask you something hypothetical," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Can we meet for lunch? Corner Cafe at noon?" "Perfect. Thanks, Audra." Before lunch, Devon made 2 other calls. The first was to a security shop downtown where he ordered a voice-activated recorder small enough to fit inside a speaker base. The second was to Best Buy, confirming they had bookshelf speakers in stock. He spent the morning reviewing project specs, his mind split between load calculations and the weight of what he'd discovered. Every so often, his eyes would drift to the legal pad, to that single question that now felt like the beginning of an investigation he never wanted to conduct. At 11:30, he drove to the address he'd found for Grant Whitfield's firm. The building was glass and steel, 12 stories of professional offices with reserved parking underneath. Devon circled the lot slowly, noting the black Audi S5 parked in spot 23B. He remembered Camille mentioning it months ago. "Oh, that's just a client's car." The lie felt different now, viewed through the lens of yesterday's revelation. Audra was already at Corner Cafe when Devon arrived, a stack of folders beside her iced tea. She studied his face as he sat down, her expression careful. "So," she said, "hypothetical questions?" Devon leaned forward. "If someone wanted to move marital assets through a real estate transaction without their spouse knowing, how would they do it?" Audra's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't ask the obvious follow-up questions. Instead, she opened one of her folders. There are several mechanisms. The most common involves creating an LLC as a holding company, then routing transactions through that entity. It's legal, but it can be used to obscure ownership and transfer of assets. How would you trace something like that? I'd start with property records, cross-reference with LLC filings, follow the money backward. She paused. "Do you want me to look into something specific?" Devon met her eyes. "Yes, but I need absolute discretion." "You have it." She pushed a notepad toward him. "Write down what you need me to find." After lunch, Devon stopped at Best Buy. He purchased a new bookshelf speaker system carefully opening the package in his truck to install the recorder in the base before resealing it. The installation at home took less than 15 minutes. "The old one was buzzing," he told Camille as he replaced the speaker. "This should sound better." She smiled, touching his shoulder as she passed. Always fixing things. 2 days passed. Devin maintained his routine: work, dinner, evening television with Camille curled against him on the couch. But now he noticed things. The way she checked her phone when she thought he wasn't looking. How she took calls in the other room. The careful performance of contentment. On the third morning, while reviewing the recorder's feed, he heard it. He was supposed to be in the shower, and he had been, until the water went cold and he stepped out early. Standing in the hallway in his towel, he heard Camille's voice through the speaker. "He signed the refinance paperwork without reading the full rider," she was saying, her tone light with amusement. "You should have seen it, Grant. He just trusted me completely. That's always been the problem with him. He's too good." Devin stood perfectly still, water dripping from his hair onto the hardwood floor. The conversation continued for another 3 minutes. Nothing explicitly incriminating, but the familiarity in their tone was unmistakable. When it ended, he waited 5 more minutes before walking into the living room, perfectly composed. That evening, after Camille had gone to bed, Devin sat at his desk with the legal pad. Beneath his first question, he wrote another. Who else is involved? The corner cafe hummed with lunch rush conversation as Devin slid into the booth across from Audra. Without a word, he placed the refinance document on the table between them. Audra picked it up, her dark-rimmed reading glasses perched precisely on her nose as she began to scan. Devin watched her face. In 15 years of working together, he'd seen Audra review hundreds of financial documents. Her expression normally remained neutral, professional, a mask of analytical detachment. But 40 seconds into reading the refinance rider, something changed. Her eyebrows drew together slightly. She flipped back a page, then forward again. "Devin," she said quietly, "when did you sign this?" 12 days ago. "Why?" Audra laid the document flat, pointing to a specific paragraph. "This is what we call a modified equity transfer clause. It's buried in standard refinancing language, but there's nothing standard about it." She traced the text with her pen. "If your wife files for divorce within 90 days of signing and invokes this rider, approximately 60% of your home's equity transfers to a separate investment vehicle." Devin felt his coffee go cold in his hands. "What kind of vehicle?" "That's what I spent yesterday afternoon finding out." Audra reached into her leather portfolio and extracted a stack of papers. "The vehicle is an LLC registered in Louisiana. 2 members listed, Camille Ashford and Grant Whitfield Enterprises." She laid out the documentation. "The LLC was formed 14 months ago, Devin, 3 weeks after your promotion to senior project manager." The timing hit Devin like a physical blow. 3 weeks after his salary had jumped 30%. 3 weeks after he'd told Camille they could finally afford the kitchen renovation she'd wanted. It hadn't been impulsive. It hadn't been emotional. It had been constructed. "How much equity are we talking about?" His voice stayed level. Audra consulted another page. "Based on current market value and your mortgage balance, roughly $287,000. Devin nodded slowly, processing. "And the window closes in?" 78 days from signing. Audra leaned forward. "Devin, this isn't just about the house. The way this is structured, the timing, the corporate partnership, suggests there might be other financial arrangements we haven't uncovered yet. Do you want me to keep pulling the thread?" "Yes. Document everything. Every transaction, every filing, every connection you can trace." He paused. "And Audra, thank you. You don't have to thank me. Just tell me what else you need." They spent another hour reviewing specific documents, Audra explaining the technical mechanics of how the equity transfer would work, how it could be challenged, what documentation would be crucial. Devon took careful notes in his small leather notebook, his engineering mind mapping the structure of what had been built around him. That evening, he walked through his front door at his usual time. Camille was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. The domestic normalcy of it felt surreal now, knowing what lay beneath. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing her cheek as he always did. "Good. Had a showing at that Tudor revival on Oak Street. The couple loved it," she smiled, adding bell peppers to the pan. "How about you? Any exciting meetings?" "Just the usual project reviews." He watched her hands move with practiced efficiency. Had she practiced this too? This easy conversation? This performance of contentment? "Need help with dinner?" "No, I've got it. Pour yourself a drink if you want. It'll be ready in 20. Later that night, after Camille had gone to bed, Devon sat at his desk with his laptop. He created a new document, protected it with a password he'd never used before, and began constructing a timeline. At the top, he typed, 14 months ago. Promotion announced. Salary increase effective immediately. Told Camille about kitchen renovation plans. LLC formed. C. Ashford and G. Whitfield Enterprises listed as members. He stared at the screen, the cursor blinking after each entry, like a metronome counting beats in a song he was only now learning to hear. With methodical precision, he continued adding dates, events, and financial moves he could remember. Each entry felt like another piece of scaffolding being revealed, the structure of deception that had been built around him while he worked, trusted, and believed in the life he thought they shared. Judge Horace Pittman's study felt like stepping into another era. Dark wood panels lined the walls, and leather-bound law books filled built-in shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. Devon sat in a worn leather chair across from his mentor, watching as Pittman poured 2 fingers of bourbon into crystal tumblers. "So," Pittman said, handing Devon a glass, "who's this friend who needs a family attorney?" Devon took the bourbon, studying the amber liquid. He'd known Pittman since he was 22, fresh out of engineering school, dating the judge's niece. The relationship hadn't lasted, but his connection with Pittman had. The older man had become a mentor, a source of measured wisdom when Devon needed clarity. "That transparent, am I?" "Son, I've known you 16 years. You've never once asked about divorce lawyers?" Pittman settled into his chair. "Want to tell me what's really happening?" Devon took a slow breath, then laid out the basics, the phone call, the equity clause, the LLC, the timeline Audra had uncovered. He kept his voice steady, factual, like he was presenting project specifications at work. Pittman listened without interruption, his weathered face thoughtful. When Devon finished, Pittman was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that shifted everything. "The woman you're describing didn't build this alone. Somebody taught her how to think about it. Somebody who's done this kind of math before." The words hit Devon like a key turning in a lock. He drove home that night with Pittman's observation echoing in his mind. Who had taught Camille? Who had shown her how to layer deception beneath perfectly normal paperwork? The answer, when it came, was obvious. Yvette Broussard, Camille's mother. Devon spent the next morning requesting courthouse records. What he found made his chest tight. Before marrying Camille's father, Yvette had been married to a man named Walter Deschamps. Their divorce, 27 years ago, had involved a complex asset reclassification that left Walter stripped of his house and savings. The mechanism was nearly identical to what Camille had constructed, right down to the way the paperwork was structured. It took Devon 3 hours to track Walter down in Baton Rouge. He almost expected the number to be disconnected, but on the 4th ring, a gravelly voice answered. "Mr. Deschamps, my name is Devon Ashford. I'm calling about Yvette Broussard." There was a long pause. Then, "Well, that's a name I haven't heard in a while. What's she done now?" Devon explained his situation carefully, watching his words. He didn't have to say much. Walter started filling in the gaps himself, his voice carrying decades of quiet bitterness. "She planned it for months. Walter said. Maybe longer. Changed account structures, moved money through her business, had me sign papers I didn't understand. By the time I realized what was happening, she'd already built the cage around me. Lost my house, the one I'd owned before we even met. Lost my savings, spent 3 years in court trying to fight it. And you never recovered any of it? Nah. She was too smart, had it all locked up legal and tight. That woman, she thinks like a chess player. Always 10 moves ahead. Always planning the endgame while you're still learning the rules. Walter paused. You said her daughter's doing the same thing to you? Similar structure. Similar timing. Too similar to be coincidence. Walter laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course it is. Yvette's been perfecting this playbook for decades. Probably taught her girl everything. How to move the pieces, when to file the papers, how to make it all look clean and legal. She does this thing. Makes men feel like they're not good enough, like there's something to be managed and discarded when a better option comes along. They talked for 2 hours. Walter shared details about specific legal mechanisms Yvette had used, names of attorneys she'd worked with, patterns Devon should watch for. When they finished, Devon had 6 pages of notes. Mr. Deschamps, Devon said carefully, if I needed a formal statement about what you've told me, would you be willing to provide one? Son, I've been waiting 27 years for someone to ask me that question. You send me whatever papers you need signed. The next evening, Devon recorded a formal phone statement with Walter. The old man's voice was clear and steady as he detailed Yvette's methods, the parallel patterns, the generational transfer of strategy. Devon saved the audio file in 3 different secure locations. Then he opened his timeline document and added a new entry at the top. Yvette Broussard, original architect. First marriage to Walter Deschamps. Developed asset reclassification strategy. Pattern repeated with Camille. Confirmation recorded and archived. The suggestion came over Friday morning coffee, Camille's voice warm and casual. What if we got away this weekend? Just us. That little beach cottage in Gulf Shores is available. Devon looked up from his newspaper, studying his wife's face. She was smiling. That particular smile he'd seen countless times before, but now recognized as performance. Her hand rested near his on the table, wedding ring catching the morning light. That sounds perfect, he said, matching her tone exactly. I could use a break. The drive down took 4 hours. Camille played DJ, singing along to old songs they both knew. Devon kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the center console where she could easily reach for it. When she did, he squeezed back gently. Every touch was a data point now. The cottage sat 2 rows back from the beach, weathered blue paint and white trim. As they unpacked, Devon watched Camille move through the space. She was tactile with everything, straightening pillows, adjusting curtains, creating the impression of domestic contentment. But her phone never left her pocket, and when it buzzed, she always stepped onto the deck to check it. That first evening, they walked on the beach at sunset. Camille wore a light sweater against the October breeze, her hair catching gold in the fading light. She pointed out shells, laughed at the way the foam chased their feet, and told stories about childhood trips to this same stretch of coast. Devon listened carefully, noting how she wove truth and fiction, because he knew now that's what she was doing. The real memories were there, but they were scaffolding for something else. Back at the cottage, while Camille showered, Devon sat on the bed with his phone. Their shared calendar app was still synced, something she'd apparently forgotten to change. He scrolled back through months of entries, and there it was. Every Thursday, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Client showing, Whitfield portfolio. The same block, the same label, stretching back 11 months. Devon took screenshots, careful to capture the recurring pattern. He saved them to his secure folder, then cleared his browser history. When Camille emerged from the shower, he was reading a novel he'd brought along. "What chapter are you on?" she asked, toweling her hair. "Just started," he said, which wasn't a lie. He hadn't absorbed a single word. Saturday brought perfect weather. They had breakfast at a local cafe, where Camille touched his hand across the table and talked about future trips they should take. Devon watched the subtle tells, the way her eyes flickered when mentioning plans beyond the next few months, the slight tension in her smile when he mentioned hosting Christmas at their house. On the beach, they found a quiet spot away from other couples. Camille leaned back against him, and Devon wrapped his arms around her waist. She was playing her role flawlessly, the devoted wife reconnecting with her husband. He wondered if she'd practiced this too, if there was a script in her head for every gesture. "This is nice," she said, watching the waves. "Just us." "It is," he agreed, and felt her relax further, interpreting his response as validation of her performance. That afternoon, while he was supposedly napping, Devon heard her on the deck again. Her voice was too low to make out words, but he recognized the tone, the same one from those 47 seconds in the car. He lay still, counting her pacing footsteps, noting the duration of the call. Sunday morning, as they packed to leave, Camille was especially attentive. She made coffee exactly how he liked it, touched his shoulder as she passed, created small moments of intimacy that would have meant everything 3 weeks ago. "I'm really glad we did this," she said, as they loaded the car. "It reminded me how much I value us." Devon pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "I feel exactly the same way." They drove home with the windows down, the Gulf air following them inland. Camille fell asleep against the passenger window. Devon drove in silence, one hand steady on the wheel, watching the highway unroll ahead. Back home, they unpacked separately, Camille sorting laundry downstairs while Devon handled their toiletries and overnight bags upstairs. Once she was asleep, he sat on his side of the bed, opened his laptop, and added the calendar screenshots to his growing documentation. The file was becoming substantial now, each piece fitting together like the infrastructure plans he reviewed at work. Devon pulled into Terrence's driveway at 6:45 a.m., early enough that his brother would be on his first cup of coffee, but not yet headed to the gym. The modest brick ranch house sat quiet in the morning light, American flag hanging still in the windless dawn. Terrence opened the door before Devon could knock. At 52, he still maintained his military bearing, crew cut gone silver, shoulders squared, eyes alert. He took one look at Devon's face and stepped back. "Kitchen," he said. "Coffee's fresh." Devon followed him through the familiar house, past framed service photos and the boxing medals Terrence had won during his Army years. The kitchen was pure bachelor efficiency. Clean counters, basic appliances, everything in its place. Just like Terrence himself. They sat at the small table by the window. Terrence poured 2 cups of black coffee and waited. "I need to tell you something," Devon said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you react." For the next 20 minutes, Devon laid it out chronologically. The forgotten phone call, the equity clause, the LLC documentation, Yvette's history, the calendar entries. With each detail, he watched his brother's jaw tighten, watched the soldier's discipline warring with the older brother's protective instinct. When Devon finished, Terrence stood abruptly. His coffee cup rattled against the saucer. "I'm going to break that man's jaw," he said flatly. "Grant, whatever the hell, he's dead." "No," Devon said. "You're not." "The hell I'm not. He's been sleeping with your wife, stealing from you." "Sit down, Terrence." Something in Devon's tone, the quiet authority of it, made Terrence pause. He lowered himself back into his chair, hands flat on the table. "You hit him, she wins," Devon said. "You show up at his office, she wins. You do anything that makes me look unhinged, she wins. That's what this whole thing is designed to do. It's a trap built on the assumption that I'll react exactly the way you want to right now. So what? We just let them. There's more." Devon pulled out his phone, opened his secure folder. Audra found something yesterday. This isn't just about the marriage anymore. He showed Terence the documentation, photographs of bid sheets, contract details, project specifications, all confidential, all photographed from Devon's home office files, all dated to coincide with Grant Whitfield's successful underbidding of 2 major municipal contracts. $4.2 million, Devon said quietly. That's how much those contracts were worth. And Grant's firm won them both by somehow knowing exactly what numbers to beat. Terence leaned back, understanding dawning. That's not divorce court. That's federal. Exactly. Which is why we're going to handle this my way. Devon laid out 3 fingers. First, we legally challenge the equity clause before the window closes. My attorney files tomorrow. Camille won't know until it's done. Second, we document everything. The LLC, the bid theft, all of it. Build the case completely before anyone moves. Third, he paused. When it's all in place, I confront her. On my terms. When she thinks she's already won. Terence studied his brother. The muscle in his jaw still jumped, but his eyes had shifted from fury to something else. Recognition, maybe. This wasn't the quiet engineer he'd always protected. This was a strategist. You need a witness, Terence said finally. Someone who knows the whole truth in real time. In case anything goes sideways. That's why I'm here. They sat in silence for a moment, the morning sun stretching across the kitchen floor. Finally, Terence nodded once, sharply. All right. Your way. But I'm staying close. Devon stood, checked his watch. I need to get to the office. But Terence, not a word. To anyone, even if you see them around town. I know how to keep position, Terence said, military precision in every syllable. Back in his car, Devon pulled out his phone and dialed Audra. It's time, he said when she answered. Let's bring in the attorney. Quietly. Devon sat across from Richard Callahan in the attorney's private office, watching the older man review document after document with methodical precision. The morning sun filtered through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the mahogany desk between them. This is remarkably thorough, Callahan said, adjusting his reading glasses. He lifted the LLC documentation Audra had assembled. Your forensic accountant, Mills, is it? She does exceptional work. She's the best at what she does, Devon replied quietly. Callahan nodded, spreading out the timeline. 14 months of documented activity. The LLC formation coinciding with your promotion. The equity transfer clause buried in the refinance documentation. He paused at Walter's recorded statement transcript. And this is particularly compelling. Previous pattern of behavior, established methodology. Devon watched the attorney work, noting how he organized everything into precise categories. It reminded him of his own engineering mindset. Systems within systems, every component analyzed for structural integrity. The bid information, Callahan said, tapping that folder, that's beyond my purview, but it provides significant leverage. He looked up at Devon. You understand that once we file the challenge to the refinance rider, things will move quickly. We can do it quietly, but your wife will be notified eventually through official channels. I understand, but we need to file before the 90-day window closes. Agreed. I'll have it ready today. The non-disclosure argument is solid. Burying a clause like this in 47 pages without explicit discussion is textbook predatory. Callahan made a note. And you're certain about the anonymous tip to your firm's counsel? It needs to happen simultaneously, Devon said. The pressure has to come from multiple directions. Later that morning, Devon sat in his home office, laptop open to his work email. At 10:43 a.m., he heard Camille's car start in the driveway. Through the window, he watched her reverse out at 10:45 a.m., right on schedule for her standing Thursday appointment. He documented the timestamp, then opened his secure folder and reviewed the calendar entries again. 11 months of Thursdays, all marked client showing, Whitfield portfolio. Each one a carefully maintained lie. At 11:03 a.m., an email arrived from the firm's general counsel. Confidential. Internal security review. Bid process documentation. Devon allowed himself a small smile. The anonymous tip had landed. The house sat quiet around him as he worked, responding to routine emails, participating in video calls, maintaining the appearance of normalcy. At 2:20 p.m., Camille's car pulled back into the driveway. Devon documented the timestamp. She came inside humming, dropped her keys in the bowl by the door. "Oh, I didn't know you were working from home today. Had some calls I needed quiet for," Devon said, not looking up from his screen. "Good showing?" Promising buyers." She paused in his office doorway. "Actually, can we talk later? After dinner, maybe?" Devon nodded, still focused on his laptop. "Of course." The evening unfolded with practiced domesticity. They ate dinner, chicken pasta Camille had prepared, her specialty. She seemed distracted, checking her phone more than usual. Devon noticed her hands trembled slightly as she cleared the dishes. Finally, at 7:45 p.m., she sat him down in the living room, the same room where she'd forgotten to end that call. 47 seconds that had changed everything. "Devon," she began, her voice careful, rehearsed, "I need to tell you something. I've been struggling for a while now." She twisted her wedding ring. "I feel like we've grown apart. Like we want different things." He watched her perform grief with practiced precision. Every pause, every pained expression, she had practiced this, probably in front of her mirror. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," she continued, "and I've consulted an attorney just to understand our options." She reached into her bag and withdrew a document folder. "This is a separation agreement. I think it's best if we consider this, for both of us." Devon accepted the folder, opened it slowly. He read through the pages, recognizing the language Audra had warned him about. There, in Section 7.3, the equity clause activation was embedded exactly as predicted. He set the document on the coffee table between them, looked at his wife of 5 years, this woman who thought she had orchestrated everything perfectly, who believed he would never see the full picture. "Before we go any further," he said calmly, "I want to make sure we're both being completely honest." He opened his laptop. Devon turned the laptop toward Camille, his movements precise and unhurried. The screen's blue light cast shadows across her face as she leaned forward, confusion flickering in her eyes. "First," he said quietly, "there's this." He clicked play on an audio file. Her own voice filled the room. He signed without reading the rider. "Just like you said he would." A pause, then laughter. "He trusts me completely." Camille's face drained of color. Her fingers gripped the edge of the coffee table, knuckles white against the dark wood. Devon watched her process the impossible. Her own voice, her own words, her own betrayal echoing back at her. "That's from our living room," he continued, voice steady. 3 days ago." He opened another file. "But let's start at the beginning. 14 months ago, to be exact." He turned the screen slightly, showing her the LLC documentation. There it was in clean black text, her name beside Grant Whitfield Enterprises. Her eyes darted across the page, searching for an explanation that didn't exist. "The timing is interesting," Devon said. 3 weeks after my promotion, the same week you started insisting we keep our finances more flexible." He scrolled through Audra's meticulously assembled timeline. Bank transfers, property records, meeting dates. Every transaction, every shell company, every connection. Camille opened her mouth, closed it. Her carefully constructed script had no lines for this moment. But here's what really caught my attention. Devon opened another audio file. Walter's voice, aged but clear. "Yvette walked me through the same thing back in '92. Asset reclassification through real estate holdings. Equity transfer riders buried in refinance paperwork. She called it her insurance policy. "My mother has nothing," Camille started. "Your mother has everything to do with this." Devon cut in, still calm. "She gave you the playbook, the same one she used on Walter." He pulled up the legal filing. "This was submitted this morning, challenging the equity rider as a predatory non-disclosure. My attorney was particularly interested in the pattern of behavior." Camille's breathing had become shallow. The performance of grief she'd prepared was crumbling, replaced by genuine panic. Her eyes kept returning to the laptop screen, as if hoping the evidence would somehow vanish. "But that's not the most serious issue," Devon said. He opened the final folder. "These are photographs of my firm's bid documentation, confidential contract details, pricing structures, timeline commitments." He scrolled through them slowly. "And these are Grant's subsequent bids, coming in just under our numbers every time. 2 municipal contracts, $4.2 million total value." He looked at her directly. "That last item isn't a divorce matter. That's a federal matter." Camille's hands were shaking. I didn't." "Here's what happens next," Devon interrupted, placing a new document on the coffee table. "This is a revised separation agreement. My attorney prepared it. Full equity returns to me. You waive all claim to assets accumulated after the LLC formation. There's a non-disclosure clause." He tapped the paper. "Sign it within 48 hours, and the bid theft documentation stays where it is, for now." She stared at the document, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. The silence stretched between them, broken only by her uneven breathing. "Call your mother," Devon said, standing and collecting his laptop. "She should hear this from you directly." He paused at the doorway. 48 hours, Camille. Not a minute more." He walked out, each step measured, controlling his breathing. In his car, he sat for a moment, hands steady on the wheel. Then he drove to Terrence's house, the familiar route requiring no thought. His brother's kitchen light was on. Devon walked in without knocking. They were long past formalities. Terrence looked up from his coffee, read Devon's expression instantly. "It's done?" Devon sat heavily at the kitchen table. For the first time since that red light, since those 47 seconds that had changed everything, he allowed his shoulders to drop. The exhale that came was deep, carrying 14 months of calculated restraint. "It's done," he confirmed. The revised separation agreement landed on Devon's desk 36 hours after he walked out of his living room. Camille's signature, usually flowing and confident, looked shaky on the dotted line. Later, through Terrence's connections, Devon learned that Yvette had made the call after receiving Devon's direct phone call about Walter's willingness to testify. "Sign it immediately," she told her daughter. For once, Yvette's calculations served truth instead of deception. 3 days later, Grant Whitfield's office received the certified letter from Devon's firm's general counsel. The language was precise, professional, and devastating in its implications. By that afternoon, Grant had retained Marcus Behrens, a defense attorney known for protecting corporate clients from federal exposure. Within a week, Grant's written responses to preliminary inquiries made it clear he would protect himself at Camille's expense without hesitation. The LLC dissolved like sugar in rain. The house stayed with Devon. 2/3 of their liquid assets followed, documented as compensation for financial harm. Camille packed 3 suitcases and moved into her mother's guest room in Metairie. 14 months rolled past like slow water. Devon stood in his transformed kitchen, morning light streaming through windows that hadn't existed the year before. The wall that once separated dining room from kitchen lay in memory only, replaced by an open concept that made the whole first floor feel like it could breathe. New hardwood ran throughout, warm against bare feet. The countertops, dark granite that held light like water, were his choice alone. His phone buzzed. A news alert! Grant Whitfield Enterprises had lost its appeal to retain the second municipal contract. Both projects, rescinded and rebid, had gone to other firms. Grant's operation had shrunk to half its former size, and a civil suit from Thompson Construction, who had suspected bid interference from the start, was grinding through the system with methodical determination. Devon set his coffee cup in the sink, straightened his tie, and headed to the office where his name now appeared on the partnership roster. The security commendation that had helped cement his promotion sat framed on his desk. Recognition for identifying systemic vulnerabilities and implementing protective protocols. No one connected it directly to the bid theft investigation. Devon had made sure of that. The morning sun caught his wedding band's old tan line, long since faded. He'd heard through industry circles that Camille had transferred her real estate license to St. Charles Parish, a smaller market where properties moved slower and commissions ran thinner. Her reputation in Orleans Parish had suffered the quiet death of whispered conversations and unreturned calls. Professional communities had long memories for betrayal. 8 months after the divorce finalized, Devon's phone had lit up with Yvette's number. He'd answered, curious despite himself. "Devon?" she'd said, her voice carrying that familiar polish that now sounded hollow. "I've been thinking about everything, about what happened." A pause engineered to sound meaningful. "Is there any possibility, any chance at all, of reconciliation?" Devon had listened to the full question, had noted the complete absence of apology, of accountability, of genuine reflection, had recognized the performance for exactly what it was. "No," he'd said, and hung up. Now, standing on the job site with his clipboard and hard hat, Devon watched the steel beams rising against the autumn sky. The structure took shape exactly as the blueprints promised. Each load carefully calculated, each joint precisely placed, every stress point accounted for. The afternoon sun caught the metal and made it shine. His phone buzzed. "Terrence, you coming to dinner Sunday?" "Melissa's making that chocolate thing you like." Devon smiled, typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." Looking up at the building again, he understood what quiet really meant. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. Everything held because someone had done the math first, had understood the forces at play, had built accordingly. He adjusted his hard hat, tucked his phone away, and walked toward the site supervisor who was waving him over. "I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like."